can't.
Sorry.
It's a really.
I'm not going to pay attention.
It's a really
Okay.
big.
Middle East there.
But
Yeah. I mean, and you think pan off to your recording through there and pan off.
that just
On that.
Yeah.
Oh, it's one of these.
Yeah, so if
Right.
if you make damage it, if you damage it yourself,
Everything's
it's
okay.
pretty safe.
Yeah.
They'll repair it.
Or whatever.
They give
Actually,
really
amazing to be listening to data science automation.
Some years ago,
it's
two
all
students in
like
Iran
the
found
same
Mars and they sent me a file to security.
Vaguely, we did some of that in my multidimensional calculus class, but not in a like proper physics context.
Alright. Okay, so we're starting 1 minute late, or 1 minute, something like that. I think I know all of you by now. And you probably all have sick and tired of me already. But it's another couple of hours to go before you see the end of me. I'm going to talk today about what I call hints on doing research. And it's based on basically all the mistakes I made in the last, 35 years of stuff. So I want this to be somewhat interactive. So if you can, if you have any questions, stop me at any time. I should warn you that we're being recorded, so everything you say will be available 10,000 years from now on Google or whatever is there 10,000 years from now. And so it's meant to be fairly informal, and I'm just going to try and work through some of this stuff. But the agenda, roughly speaking, what I call great research. It's an acronym. I'm going to talk about how to give a talk. It's very presumptuous to give a talk about how to give a talk. And I'll explain why that's okay in this case. And then some miscellaneous advice. And then I'm going to end with how to read a paper and how to do a literature survey. So, okay, I'll just jump right in. About 15 years ago, I was asked to give a talk to PhD students on doing research. And I came with this acronym called GREAT, which stands for this: grounded, risky, ethical, absorbing, thorough. And what I want you to remember that, and is to I'll go through what these things mean. So by grounded, I mean that when you're doing research, you are often building on some theory that's already there, and so it's often tempting to just do something, and especially you're writing code, you just want to build something, write some code, get it done without thinking, what theory is underlying it. You just want to get it done, right? And I made the same mistake, right? And it's not something that withstands the test of time. If you want to build something that really is going to last 10, 15, 20 years into the future, you have to build on some theoretical background. So in the case of machine learning, for example, many of you will be using machine learning techniques. You're probably going to say, well, I think I'll use this technique or that technique. I saw this paper, I saw this other thing. It seems to work fine. There's a lot of ad hoc kind of magic that is used in doing these things. What you want to do is to step back and say, what is the best approach? Maybe classical approaches are better, maybe they're not, right? So use the right theoretical background, and that makes a huge difference. So you aren't just diving into, okay, let me download PyTorch and let me download this and start cranking the wheel, but step back and see what you want to do. The other thing that you're going to be grounded in is your assumptions. So all your work will make some assumptions about something or the other. You've got to zoom away the messiness of nature. And making the right assumptions makes a huge difference. If you make the wrong assumptions, you'll never make any progress. If you make too many assumptions, your work will not have general relevance. So let me give you a very practical example. You've all seen Newton's tree, and you probably knew Newton was here. But how many of you remember what Newton assumed, for his laws of mechanics? Like what did he assume away? For the laws of motion, right? What is it that what has to be true for the laws of motion to hold?
No air resistance.
No resistance, no friction, right? Body in motion continues in motion forever, right? Is it true? Right? Every single example we see is actually, it violates that assumption. So was Newton really stupid? Why did he choose to design something that only exists in outer space? Even there, sort of approximately, because of whatever. Right? Why did he make an assumption that there's no friction? Somebody spoke about Navier-Stokes equation a minute ago. Why did Newton assume no friction?
Because it's easier to calculate.
Because otherwise he couldn't do any calculations. He didn't have computers, he didn't have supercomputers, he had none of those tools.
Calculus.
Yeah, he had to invent calculus to start with. And so he said, okay, I'm going to make life a bit simple, I'm going to ignore friction. So he made the right assumption, he made a huge amount of progress, but he could test his theories only in the laws of motion of the planets. Because everything on Earth actually doesn't either. And he said, okay, if I introduce friction, it's too difficult, let somebody else figure it out. It's 400 years later, we still haven't figured it out. We still are doing sort of numerical simulations. We still don't have an adequate theory of turbulence and turbulent flows. So choosing the right assumption is super important. But you've got to be very careful that when you choose an assumption, it's not too constraining, right? And it's not too broad, right? So this is based on in many cases a gut instinct. Okay, that assumption seems okay. That assumption does not seem okay, and you'll get help from your supervisor on doing this. Supervisors on doing this. But that's what I mean by grounded. You have to ground yourself in the right theory and the right assumptions. And if you haven't got that, then you're not doing good research. You can't do good research. And so think about Newton when you have these. So very often, especially students in their first year, the Emirates year, are going to say, I want to do this, and I want to do this, and this. It gets more and more. It's called boiling the ocean. You can't boil the ocean, but it takes 40 gigatons of carbon dioxide pumped into the air for 200 years, and then you can boil the ocean. So humanity is doing a fantastic job of it. It took 200 years and a lot of carbon dioxide. And it's still not boiling. It's only raised to 1.5 degrees centigrade. If you want to really boil it, it's going to take more time. So don't do it. Pick something. Boil a test tube. That's much easier. Right? So start small. That's grounded. So and the other thing is to look for the gap between hype and reality. Right? There's always hype about research. You look at a newspaper or BBC or whatever, social media. Oh, so and so has solved this problem. And there's always so-called hot topics in research. There's always a gap between what they think they can do, what they can actually do. So that gap is where actually all the good research happens. So you've got to be skeptical about any claims. So always look at the gap. I already talked about that. This thing. Assumptions are critical. Be the harshest critic of your own work in terms of the assumptions. So constantly ask yourself, are these assumptions valid? Am I just deluding myself? Is this really true? And so is the case. And if it's not the case, if you can't convince yourself, then just move on. Because if you can't convince yourself, you can't convince anybody else either. I'll tell you a story about this. So 25 years ago, 1997, I was asked to present, there are two different theories, not even theories, two different ways of building computer networks back in the 90s. And there was a fight going on between, technology A and technology B, and I had written many papers in technology B, and I published papers about it. I wrote a book about it. And so I was asked for this international conference to say, okay, defend technology B, and you'll be debating somebody who has technology A. And so I said, okay, better prepare for the debate. And I started reading all the papers on the other side. And the more I read about it, the more I realized they were right. Technology B was doomed. And so I remember this was in Kyoto. There was this massive room. There were like 4,000 people in the audience. And I said, I'm here to defend technology B, but I'm sorry to tell you I can't defend it. It's wrong. And I spent 7 years working on it, wrote a book about it. It's all a waste of time. Guys, move on. Prepare to move on. Technology A is one, right? And I got a lot of criticism about it. And next day I stopped working in the area. And I was right. It was actually a dead technology. Nobody even remembers the name of the technology anymore. The acronym stands for another terrible mistake, or ATM. Okay, it's like asynchronous transfer mode. It doesn't matter. It's gone. It's wiped clean off the face of the earth. All the thousands of papers written on it are totally wasted. All the millions of dollars spent on it are wasted. Right? Because in the end, the assumptions it made, there was a very critical assumption it turned out to be wrong. And when you have that, you have to walk away. So that's wrong. Any questions about this? Okay. Yes.
What percentage of people in academia do you think are the harshest critics of their own work and are prepared to
What
move on?
percentage of successful people in academia are the harsh critics of their own work?
Sure.
Now, I'm asking the question back to you.
Oh,
There are many unsuccessful people in academia. So I think 100% of the successful people are harshest critics of their own work.
but how do you define success?
Success is in your mind.
Okay.
It's a mental construct. It's the concept. Yes.
And would you really say all that time on that technology is wasted if you find an avenue
No,
that you...
actually, I'm being harsh over here.
Yeah.
In fact, what happened is they built on good theory. So, in fact, I was one of those people. So, in 2012, 10 years ago, 15 years after I did this work, it turned out that all the math we developed for the ATN network, Transfer network, can be used for modeling solar power. So I took all the math and I said, it's not for solving computer network, it's for using solar. So we actually use all of that math for deciding how many solar panels to put on the roof of a house. So the theory grounding was super important. So yes, we walked away from the application, but we did not walk away from the theory because, as my supervisor used to say, application of theory is like kitchen sink. It's a kitchen recipe. Pour a little bit as well with that, but a theory is forever, right? So you got to have the right theories forever. So that's what we use. That's why it's important to have a theory.
Yes, I guess everything's valuable in some respect.
No, not everything is valuable.
I was trying to be nice.
There's a lot of work which is completely useless.
Fair enough.
In fact, most work is completely useless, including most of your work and mine for sure.
Thank you.
Okay, so risky. So what does it mean to do risky research? So academic research is different from industry research. Okay, what is the difference? In industry research, somebody tells you what to do. They say, go solve it. You were in industry for 9 years. You probably weren't doing research. You were given a job, go build this. Why should I build this? Because I'm paying a salary. Oh, good job. Okay, well, I'll go do it because it's a very good argument to make. In academic research, we have the choice of doing what we want to do. And because we have the choice of doing what we want to do, we are able to do risky research. And by risky, it basically means that we know something and we have a goal, right? It is different from where we are. There's a gap. This is the sort of the chasm between what you know and what you don't know. And what you want to do is to envision your goal. How will it change the world, right? Hopefully in a positive way. I mean, some people are saying, how will it change the world in a negative way? But how will it change the world in a positive way? That's what you want to do. And you want to sort of build a bridge across the chasm of uncertainty. So you have to stand on the known and you want to sort of step over to the other side by building a bridge of research to get to the other side. Slowly walk over to the other side. There you go. And that's it. So each of those is a little bit of work that you do, standing for what you know over this chasm. And if you don't build a good bridge, what will happen? You fall into the chasm of uncertainty and you'll die a miserable death. It's also called leaving a PhD program without completing it. So that's what happens when you fall into the chasm.
That's what happens to those who leave.
From our perspective, they're gone. So when you're doing risky research, basically it's a risk-reward ratio, right? The more risk you take, the more reward you're possibly going to get. And so we are lucky that we have the opportunity to be able to do risky research. So I hate students and researchers in academia who are doing incremental work. So why should you? You have a chance to do something great and fail in the process. And it's okay to fail. It's okay to say, I tried doing something and it didn't work because you're in academia. Nobody dies if you do bad research or if you take risky research. You do your best and you fail, right? That's okay. If 1 of 1,000 people succeeds in doing something that's ambitious, the reward is so big for all the society. Right? In the end, they're funding us. We're getting funding from the government and from taxpayers to do our work. It's a pretty nice gig. Yes.
So then from the PhD practical question,
Yes.
from the PhD perspective, if we fail,
Yes.
do we then have to do another one
No.
before we succeed, or we can
No.
just write up that we failed
Yeah.
and we get a PhD?
The way it works with the PhD is you will never be allowed to fail. Because when you try something ambitious, what will happen is that it's a conversation, right? You say, I want to do something very ambitious. They say, great, do it. But after you graduate. Right? When you graduate, you got to be have the ambition, but then you scale it down to what can be accomplished in 3 or 4 years. So as supervisors, our goal is to make you successful, right? So we want you to take appropriate risk, but when you have a career ahead of you, you can be as risky as you want, right? Especially if you're in academia. So if you are driven to work on something because you feel engaged in it, it's okay to take a big risk, because in some sense you're not constrained by being doing something incremental, which you are in industry. Any other questions? So that's the R, risky. So be grounded, be risky, be ethical, right? Give credit where credit is due. That's you with your halo on top, and somebody they supported you in some way. Give them credit. Ask them to be a co-author on a paper, or acknowledge them in the paper, or if you use their code, cite them, whatever. Also cite your funding sources. These people are giving us money, best to be nice to them and say, we are funded by so-and-so. Send them a copy of the paper. They might even read it. Who knows? It's possible. Miracles do happen. So be ethical. And, also don't do unethical research. What is unethical research? Like drones with machine guns on them seems to be pretty unethical to me. I really don't want to work in that area. I find it particularly annoying. But they're being built by researchers. It's quite terrible. Anyway. Absorbing. Absorbing means that you want the research to sort of take over your life. Okay. It's for a PhD, that's what you want to happen. Basically, as a PhD student, if you're doing it right, you have no free time. Because there's a background process that's running. It's like constantly, what about, how does this work? It makes you a complete pain in the neck to be around. But it's really good to be doing that. You want to absorb talks, you want to absorb unexpected results, you want to read widely, and then you want to share your ideas. Tell everybody what you're working on. Don't keep it a secret. There's some people who think that if you share ideas, people will steal it from you. Guess what? As a PhD student, the biggest thing that can happen in your life is somebody steals your idea. And because most people don't give a care, don't care. They just don't care. It's like, I have this great idea. You say, yeah, right, what's for dinner? Okay. Having somebody steal your idea and use this is actually like the biggest compliment you can get. It actually means it has some value. And most things you're going to do will have no value. Most things I've done have no value. Most likely through other people. So share your ideas freely, collaborate with people, and absorb them into your research. Another great thing is if you have a good idea, other people steal it, or even better, collaborate with you on it. That means you increase your capacity to do research on your idea. You've got other people working on your stuff. Great. Right? The more successful you are, the more people will work on your idea. Right? And that's very good. You can only do that if you tell them what the idea is. So I think you want to absorb ideas and you want to absorb people into your ideas. So you want to be passionate about your work. Again, if you don't care about it, do something else, drop out. It's no point. No point in, because it will take over your life to do research, especially as a PhD student. You have to read widely, attend diverse talks. There's no talk that you will go to that you won't find interesting on some level, because you can at least say that's a great example of bad research, or that's completely incomprehensible. Now I know how little I know, right? So you learn something. And so as a student, and even now I attend talks about completely random areas, because at Cambridge especially, there are lots of talks going on every day. And just walk into a seminar room, sit in the back, and just see what happens. Share your ideas. It's a good idea to have a blog or a research website where you can share or put down your ideas that people can steal from, and maintain the research. So keep it up to date with your publications. It's a good thing. And then being a good researcher means being thorough, right? You need to what I call peel the onion. Why do you have to peel the onion? Has anybody peeled an onion? What happens when you peel an onion?
You cry.
You cry. Exactly. That's what happens when you do thorough research. You cry. It's a lot of work, a lot of dead ends. You go down that path and say, okay, that didn't work. Next one. You got to keep peeling and peeling and peeling until you get to the center. In the center, of course, there's nothing, but still, you peel the onion and it becomes thorough. So when you read a paper, there's some papers, you read the abstract and introduction, so yeah, they must have done X, Y, and Z. And in fact, they do X, Y, and Z, and you learned nothing. Like, so obvious, right? But then you do a paper, you say X, Y, and Z, and then beyond that, they went to alpha, beta, gamma, and all this other stuff you never thought about. That's a thorough paper. That's a paper you say, wow, that's something I never thought about. I wonder how they did that, and then you learn something. So you got to be thorough in that way. You also have to be thorough because when you do research, there's this graph which is sort of this little graph. This is time on this axis, and that's sort of the complexity of your solution or your complexity of your approach. When you start, you always start simple because you don't know enough to do something complicated. You do something simple, and that's this curve over here. And you say, oh, I'm going to add this case and this case and this case and this case. It gets more and more and more complicated and unwieldy. And then it gets like a total mess. And you say, I really didn't need this thing. I didn't need this thing. And you start removing stuff, and you get to what I call the second simplicity. And in many cases, the second simplicity and the first simplicity are the same thing. You go back and look at it and say, I don't believe it. 3 years ago, I had this idea. I have gone back to the same idea. There's a difference. And the difference is that now you know this was the right answer. When you first did it, it was just a lucky guess. Okay. And that's what I call the first and second simplicity. And when you're thorough, you actually go through this wall of complexity and then you come down again. And this sounds kind of abstract. It is abstract, but I think as you go through research, hopefully if you remember this, you have to ask yourself, is it too complex? Can I make it more simple? Am I at the first simplicity or the second simplicity? So other thing about thorough is you have to start with doing a literature survey. There's no point in reinventing the wheel, right? We always ask I ask my students always, I say, is it worth doing? Is it doable? Is it not done? Right? Same 3 questions over and over again. And it's questions you have to ask yourself. Is it worth doing? Is it doable? Is it not done? Not done is literature survey, right? If somebody's done it, then you get no credit for it. It gets scooped or it's been done. I've done research recently, 2 years ago, I tried to publish a paper and the reviewer said, you didn't know this, but in 2004, somebody published the exact same idea. We just had to cancel the project. It was over. It's been done. So we spent 2 years working on it, and all of it was wasted because my student didn't do a good literature survey. So it was his fault, not mine. But still, do a good literature survey, and later on today, I'll be telling you how to do a good literature survey. The other thing is what I call simplest non-trivial instance. So don't try to boil the ocean. Right? If you want to boil the ocean, start with boiling 1 milliliter of water. If you can't boil 1 milliliter, you can't boil the ocean anyway, right? So start with the simplest non-trivial instance. So whenever you have something to do, ask yourself, what's the simplest non-trivial instance? If it's trivial, then of course it's over. But if it's non-trivial, it's simple. Make more and more and more assumptions until you can solve the problem, and then you're done. I had a student once and I told him, solve this problem. And he said, oh, it's too simple. I said, can you do it? If it's so simple, can you do it today? He said, sure. I said, all right, this evening I want to see the answer. He comes back in the evening and he said, I didn't solve it. I said, okay, give it me tomorrow. The next week he didn't solve it. It ended up being his master's thesis. This thing was so simple, right? So he thought it was simple, but the minute he started working on it, he realized it wasn't that simple. And so but he was lucky, he hit upon the simplest non-trivial example. He thought it was trivial, but it wasn't. It sort of reminds me of this joke. There was a math professor who was writing some equations on the board, kind of wrote a lot of stuff. And of course, trivially, so and so. And somebody's student raises his hand and says, I don't understand this, but is that trivial? The professor says, wait a minute. He walks, and then he goes outside, comes back 45 minutes later, and says, yes, it's trivial. And he keeps going. So what is trivial? I don't know. So this is sort of the mantra that I have for students. Start with a simple example, learn as you go, prepare to change. And this is true for anything, right? Always start with the simplest thing, and then learn as you go. As you're going around, don't just kind of say, oh, I made a mistake here. Keep changing, learn. And then if you make a mistake, change it, right? So that little thing of in anything you do, right? It's used not just research, actually. You start simple, learn as you go, prepare to change. Being thorough also means crystallizing solutions. So what do I mean? Does somebody know what crystallization means? What does crystallization mean? Yeah.
Sort of distill things into their simplest form.
No. How do you make a crystal? How do you make sugar crystal? Does anybody know? Has anybody made sugar crystals? You made a sugar crystal?
Not sugar crystal, but another type of crystal. I created a solution, saturated, and let reduce temperature and crystallize.
Well, you're right. You supersaturate a solution, then you put a seed crystal in it.
Well,
Or
in
the
that
seed-
context, I supersaturated at a high temperature and leave it cool.
Okay, cool. Right. So now imagine that your brain is, how do you supersaturate your brain?
You read a lot.
You read a lot, and how do you lower the temperature?
You sleep.
You sleep. There you go. Perfect. That's exactly how Kekulev, I don't know, was he German? Chemist discovered the structure of benzene. He was doing experiment after experiment, and his brain was supersaturated experiment results. He woke up and he had a dream of, I think, was it snakes holding each other's tail, forming a ring. And he said, oh, it's a ring. It wasn't a straight line. He was trying all sorts of stuff. He said, oh, benzene is a ring. It was the first ring organic compound. And he discovered it by just doing more, thinking about it more and more and more, and then poof, solution comes out. So scientists have discovered that in order to crystallize a solution, what you've got to do is to study the problem very thoroughly, and then you've got to have a break. You've got to have a break when you're not doing something, you're doing something else, sleeping or doing something else altogether, and then you will wake up with a solution, and it'll be the right solution most of the time. Right? Of course, it will test it and so on. And this works remarkably well. It actually works. I do it all the time. If I want to solve a problem that I can't find a solution to, I just immerse myself on it and then do something else. And I come back, the solution is in my head. I wake up at 2 a.m, I write it down, I go back to sleep. It's amazing. So this is how crystallization works. And, don't believe me. Actually, you should not believe anything I say. Test it out for yourself. Or go read the literature, but this is actually keep an eye open for the unexpected, right? So something doesn't make sense, then just say, be skeptical. This doesn't make sense, right? So, for example, the clock over there, it's way off. It's like it says it's 5 minutes to 10. That doesn't make sense. Yet the second hand is ticking. Why? What's going on there? Well, how could it possibly be the case? So maybe there's a power outage for, whatever, it's now 10 minutes to 4. So it was 6-hour power outage? I wonder. Or is it cumulative power outages? Maybe the building maintenance isn't adequate, or maybe nobody even looks at the clock. They all look at their watches or the smartphones, or I don't know what it is. Maybe it can't be fixed. The little knob that adjusts the time is broken or something. So you look for these anomalies and you say, what's going on? Why doesn't it work? Right? Look at this globe, right? I looked at this globe and I came in. You see something funny about it? Look at this globe over here. What's funny about it?
There's dots on it?
Yeah.
It's got dots on it, but it's like black. Whoever saw a black globe in their life? I've never seen a black globe. It's got dots on it. And it says, on this side it says slate surface globe. I think you're supposed to draw on it with chalk or something, the slate surface. So maybe some geology thing you can draw on it, right? It's weird. So that's what I mean by keep an eye open for the unexpected. Black globes and clocks that don't show the right time. What's going on in this room? Carry a notebook. So I can see Jovan has got a notebook, other people have laptops. So ideas will pop into your head, or you see something and you want to take note of it. So never trust your memory. Okay? My memory is terrible. I can never remember a thing, right? And that's because I'm old. I was born before you. so I'm old. It's probably born before your parents were born, even worse. So, but you're young, but even your memory is not that great, right? So don't trust your memory. Write it down. And carry a notebook. Actually, even better than carrying a notebook, carry a notebook and something to write with. Just carrying a notebook with nothing to write with is quite frustrating. You say, I have a notebook, but we'll point with. Okay, so I'm going to stop with that. So it's grounded, risky, ethical, absorbing, thorough. That's great research. So you got all of that stuff. Any questions on any of that? So there's not meant to be comprehensively everything, but it's at least stuff that I've learned by making all sorts of mistakes, and I think I've done all of these things the wrong way already. Every one of them. Not doing a literacy survey, starting with complex thing, not learning when things don't work, not changing something even though I know it's not working, and trying to crystallize solution without giving a break, just keeping thinking about it. No, you got to have a break. And not carrying momentum. Okay, Ryan, question? No? Okay. All right, I'm going to move on to something else. How to give a research talk. So, the talk I'm about to give is not a research talk, so it doesn't count. That's why I can give a talk which is not a very good talk about how to give a great research talk, but it's not a research talk. So there you go. It's not self-referential, so I skip. Okay. So when you want to give a talk, so first of all, I should say that giving a talk on your research is something you're going to have to do over and over and over again. In your career, you probably give hundreds, if not thousands, of talks. And so doing a good job in presenting a talk is really very important, yet it's not a skill that's ever taught, right? Now, I was very fortunate when I was doing my PhD, I took a class where the professor, he said, you guys, none of you knows how to give a proper talk. I'm going to get a coach to come and give you a whole lesson on how to give a talk. And this was when I was a grad student, and this happened in 1987. It was fantastic, right? We actually took the computer architecture course. He took one slot for giving how to give a talk. We went on to win the Turing Award, and then later on became the president of ACM, and now he's an emeritus professor at Berkeley, David Patterson. So he was really fantastic. So anyway, to come back to this, two things when you're doing this preparation and this presentation, and they're both important, right? So I'm going to first give you like 10 tips on preparation, 10 tips on presentation. And one of the things you can do is to kind of have a mental bingo. Every time you see a talk, you'll see how many of these rules have been violated, right? It's funny. People who have seen, and funny, even funnier, David Patterson came and gave a talk at my prior university, and he broke all of these rules himself. So he arranged for a professional to come and give a talk, but he unfortunately didn't follow all the rules himself. I hope he's not watching this on YouTube in the future. Okay, so preparation. Tell a story, right? Your talk is really, so human beings are primed to absorb stories. We love stories. We want to know stories. So, for example, there's once upon a time, the ogre ate all the apples, so children went without. That's the problem. The solution is the anti-ogre fence. Evaluation, ogre infestation is declined 58%. Conclusions, we recommend anti-ogre fences. This is what I call the ogres and apples story. You won't believe how many talks people give where you don't know who the ogres are or what the problem is. Right? We have a problem. The children are crying. We have a real problem. I've seen talks where you listen to half an hour and they haven't told you why they're solving the problem. Why? What is it about? Why should I care? What is the solution? I've got to tell them what the solution is. What's the evaluation? And what are the conclusions? Every talk and every paper has to have these. You've got to tell us what the problem is, what the solution is, how well did it work, what's the conclusion. If you can't answer these, if you can't tell a story about it, basically you don't have a talk and you don't have a paper. As simple as that. And I had a colleague who used to say, if I don't know what problem is being solved 1.5 pages into a paper, I just reject it. I just say, yeah, this paper doesn't even tell me what problem it's solving or why it's worth solving. Right? Remember, worth solving, doable, not done. If I can't find out what those things are, so this is worth solving, right? It's doable because you solved it, and in evaluation you say it's not done, right? I mean, nobody else has done it. It's not from this point. Second, I have what I call the 1, 2, 3 rule. Have one idea per slide, right? So, for example, here's a slide that one of my students made. And he's going to talk about something called micro benchmarks. Where are you going to look? Are you going to look at the stuff on the left? I look at the stuff down here. We look at this. We look at that. Where are you looking? Right? It's too complicated. There's too many ideas. You just want one idea per slide, not too many ideas, right? And so this is a very good example of a bad slide. So please don't do it, right? Have one idea per slide. 2 minutes per slide, right? And so if you have a 30-minute talk, prepare about 15 slides. If you have more than 15 slides, you're unlikely to even get through it. And then you get this very embarrassing situation. Oh, I have 10 minutes left and I have 200 slides. I'm going to show you all of them very quickly. And I've seen people do that. They go zip, 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 zip. Like, seriously, you really expect me to understand that? So if it's very sparse, like this talk, you can have more slides. I have to be 50-ish slides, but they're very, very sparse. If you have actual research, you can't actually go through more than one slide in 2 minutes. It's very hard. That's number 2. 2 minutes per slide. Number 3, there's at most 3 topics in any presentation. So if somebody woke you up, if we watch a research talk, somebody wakes you up 6 months later and says, what do you remember from the talk? Most likely to remember nothing. In some cases, you might remember one thing. In very rare cases, you remember 3 things. You'll never remember more than 3 things. So if nobody's going to remember more than 3 things, why are you telling them more? Tell them what 3 things you want them to learn. So figure out the 3 topics, what you want them to understand, and figure it out first. It depends on the nature, and then work backwards. Say, okay, if I want them to understand this concept, what do I need to tell them in the talk so that they understand this concept? If I want to understand that concept, what do I need to do? To work backwards to put in the body of the talk so that it supports you for the 3 topics that you want them to remember. Right? And that's basically it. That's really important. So it's 1, 2, 3. So tell a story. Story has 3 conclusions or 3 topics, and you're going to tell them the 3 topics. So use outlines. Like I showed you, I'm going to say, first I'm going to talk about this, then I'm going to talk about this. Outlines show connections about what's happening. It's as important as the details. And then we repeat it. So I showed over here, like in the beginning I said, I'm going to show all the stuff. And then I say, here, how to give a research talk. And so first I'm going to tell you preparation, then presentation. I use red to say it's preparation. So you know it's all about preparation. It's not about presentation. And we're telling this. So that's part of what I'm using over here. Use outlines. Use a few words. So my former colleague, Bill Cohen, about this said, words are very good, but only when the audience is deaf. Right? Because you're talking. Why do you need to put everything? So this, by the way, is not true in electrical engineering. I discovered this quite to my surprise that my colleagues in electrical engineering were telling the students to write all the text on the slides when they prepared it. And then they would just read out word for word what's in the slide, go to the next slide, read it all out. The audience is basically deaf. What's the point? Right? So here's an example. Here are words on slides. Lush, you can read it yourself. Right? And you can do this or you can show this. Right? Which one do you like better? Right? If you want to convey this image, you're basically better off showing this. So don't use words, use pictures as much as you possibly can. Don't use too many fonts. This is a pretty, I made this, I mean, this is not an actual slide. I kind of went overboard with different fonts and colors. Especially if you use green and yellow, they're terrible. In the back of the room, you can probably not read what's there. And graphs with yellow and green is horrible. So don't use those. Use black, dark blue, whatever.
Especially for people that's colorblind.
Yeah, if you're colorblind, it's even worse. If you're green and red, it's terrible. So yeah, that's a good point. So use friendly themes, fonts, and colors. If you have a chance, go to the back of the room, put up your slides, see if you can read it from the back. If you can't read it from the back, you're losing about 1/3 of the audience. Why 1/3 from the back? How many people sit in the front row of your talk? Basically 0. Nobody wants to be in the front row. These 2 guys are keeners. They want to sit in the front row. Like, even when I go into auditorium, I don't go in the front row. I go all the way in the back so I can check my email when the talk gets boring. like Maddie's doing right now. So I do that too. But so if you lose the people in the back, they're probably not going to be able to see your slides either. They really are reading email. So never show tables when you can show graphs. Let's see. Yes.
What was the kiosk net system?
It's something I built some years ago. It was a method. It was a way of bringing messages to villages by having a Wi-Fi router on a bus, and they would pick up data from a kiosk and carry it to the next kiosk and drop it off. So basically, email service on very, very cheap for countries which didn't have any internet service. And then the whole thing was premised on the fact that internet service was difficult to get, but then when cell phones came, the whole thing died. So I had to walk away from it. that was another bit of wasted work. My career is full of failures. This is one of the bigger ones. So, but at least I got some slides out of it. So. Never show tables if you show graphs. Here are some tables, right? I picked this up from the internet somewhere. I don't know, meningococcal disease from epinorth.org. By the way, when you steal data, please at least put a citation. So, remember the halo on your head, you have to cite your sources, give credit. So that whenever you get something, just put a citation where you got it from. So this is kind of not very not easy to understand. We look at this one. This is an area map that shows Dublin, and it shows right away. I mean, you can't see the legend probably, but red is bad, so that's the highest number of cases, and green is good, that's the lowest number of cases. It just pops out that the central part is pretty rare, whereas that doesn't pop out at all in this one here, right? So the same exact data, when shown in graphical form, it just completely changes the So do try to use graphs when possible. Yes?
Did you say that goes for reports and papers as well?
Everything, yeah. Wherever you can, well-chosen graphics will convey the information far better than tables. Enough said. So if you can't, if you have obvious mistakes on your slides, why should I trust your results? Right? If you haven't bothered to spell check your slides, I have no reason to believe that your results are correct. Use examples, right? It's much easier to convey an idea using examples than to give an abstraction. Even when you go to abstract math talks, and I've been to a few, they always start with a toy example. Not always. The best speakers will start with a toy example and say, okay, let's look at this example, and then here's all the gory math behind it. You want to fix ideas in examples. Like here, right? I could have told you all of these without any examples. It would be far less effective, in my opinion, than having these examples. So a talk is formal. A research talk is formal. What I'm talking to right now is not formal. So I'm trying to keep you engaged in. But when you're doing a formal presentation, don't use slang. Don't. It's like that. And describe related and past work. One of the things we got from a talk is, why is this an advance over prior work? Why is it not done, right? So here's Newton, right? Newton said, if it's seen further, suddenly we're standing on the shoulders of giants, right? So he's kind of talking about past work. And here, it looks even better with the picture. It looks even more dramatic to have a picture. Right? Just compare these two slides. This one and this one. I have the same exact content, right? But this one looks way better. So that's exactly what I said. If you have pictures, they're much better than words. So this is like this, you can see that right away.
On the point of using pictures and
Yes.
words, I quite often find the things I'm talking about are very abstract. Like this system and you're doing this thing to it.
Yeah.
There isn't a nice image you can get of it. What would you do in that situation?
Try harder. Yeah, let's try hard. I mean, I think you can always do it. I mean, you can find pictures. It takes work to find the right picture. Talk about your contributions. I've been to many presentations over the last 35 years, and I can't remember. I've heard interview presentations where people with PhDs from very big universities, they come and give a talk. At the end of it, I talked to them and said, do you know what they did for your thesis? I don't know. They just talked about 10 ideas. How many of them were their ideas and how many of them were other people's ideas? We couldn't determine that. That's terrible, right? So you want to say, these are my contributions and this is the prior work. So talk about that. Highlight the insights, right? If you're giving a talk in a research conference, people have access to the paper, right? So they can always see the paper, can read the paper for details. But what they want to know, what you want to know as an audience member is, what is the story behind the story? What did you try and didn't work? Why did you go down this path? Giving that extra level of anecdotal support to your talks is just what makes a difference. I'm giving you anecdotes from my life. not necessarily because I like talking about myself, but because this is what you connect with, right? This is what makes it, because you want a story. And so the story behind the work is what makes it worth going to a research talk. What will you do differently next time? Or what is still open? That's where you go to conferences for. You say, oh, that looks like it's solved, but actually we didn't have this. We have to do the other thing. That's what you want to go with. Okay, so I think I'm going to switch. Oh no, end with the summary slide. So leave it up on the screen. So many people end talks with thank you, like big thank you, sometimes with a smile, sometimes a big emoji. It's a total waste of time, right? What you want to do, and I'll show you in a bit an example of this. You have a summary slide. You have people absorbing the summary as you talk, as you answer questions. Okay, so presentations. There's no any questions on preparation so far? Okay, so for presentation, talk to the audience, not the screen. Again, beginning students will do this. They'll do like this. Scan the audience, see the understanding. You see the back of their head most of the time, okay? And that's a total waste of time, right? What you want to do is to scan the audience. Some people are shy. If you're shy, just watch like 5 centimeters above somebody's head. Don't look at their face. Look 5 centimeters. They can't tell the difference, but you don't have to feel embarrassed. So you want to go from right to left, and then from left to right. This is what professional speakers do. They never look at the screen because they prepared the talk, right? They've already. So in the talk, you're going to talk to the audience, right? You never want to look at the screen at all. If you have to look at the screen, then you kind of point this way and then look away from it. You see what I mean? So scan the audience, and then come back, look where you're pointing and look away. Don't look at the screen unless you have to. And if you have to look at the screen, you have a laptop to take a look at it. Never read from notes, right? You want these headlines, you want these big things, and you want to talk about this, and try to relate it to prior talks in the seminar, talk to other speakers, stuff you read in the news. This, again, is a matter of engagement. Because if you're just reading from notes, you don't have that. As I said, not if you're an electrical engineer. Electrical engineers need to read from notes. I don't know why. Work audiences through formulae. So here I put up a fairly complicated formula. If I just flash this at you and say, yeah, it's obvious, well, it's not obvious. Right? What you have to do is to go step by step into what each of the terms is, what you're doing over here, right? And only then will somebody understand. And again, I don't know how many talks I've been to, hundreds, where people just flash equations and they say, yeah, of course, that's obvious. So at least for people like me, it's not obvious. Introduce graph axes. Whenever you put a graph, you should immediately say on the x-axis I have something, and the y-axis I have something. Here's a graph where there's no x-axis. Okay? It's a useless graph. What's the point? So if you show graphs, again, this is presentation. You say, I have a graph, I'm showing on the x-axis this, on the y-axis this, and then go on. So that should become automatic that every time you present a graph, you have to introduce the axes. Speak slowly and clearly, especially if you're not a native English speaker. So I have an accent, I have a strong accent, you may not understand me. So I'm slowing down my normal rate of speech because I want you to understand me, right? So don't speed up. Make a conscious effort to slow down. And there's also a trick. The trick is to pause and have a gap. If I say there's a trick is to pause, it's no effect. Now listen to it. There is a trick. The trick is to pause. You see what happens? Suddenly that pops out. Because your brain is predicting there's going to be some words coming after what I said, but there are no words. You say, oh, wait a minute, that email is not so important. It's going to say something right now that's actually interesting. And then you say the important thing. So put a pause before an important concept and everybody will pay attention to it. It's just hardwired into our brains. You can't avoid it. So exploit it. And even if you are, speak slowly and clearly. Respect questions. You will get questions, right? Don't try to answer a question before it's fully out. And after you hear the question, if you need more time, just say, I'm going to repeat the question back in case, just to make sure I understood. You're playing for time. That's okay. You can do that. Maybe you didn't hear the question properly. And if you really can't answer the question, you can say, let's take it offline. This sentence, let's take it offline, this is the white flag of surrender. Like, you got me, I can't answer it, please, I can't do it. And, you know, you're begging them to let you go, and everybody knows that this is the flag of distress. And you run it up, let's go offline, they'll say, okay, you'll stop. And so whenever you get a nasty questionnaire and you just can't take it anymore, you can say, let's take it offline. And you know what? It'll always work.
And we'll never talk about it again.
Possibly. The reason why people ask difficult questions in talks is to prove that they're smarter than you, right? Not all questions, obviously clarification questions, but the people who say, oh, I want to show that I'm smarter than the speaker, and they'll ask this really tough question, they'll keep asking it over and over again. When you say, let's take it offline, basically you acknowledge they win. After that, they don't really care about the question anymore. They go on off to have coffee or whatever it is and probably go annoy some other speaker. So this I teach all my students, just remember this, when you're really in distress, take it offline. Practice makes perfect. If you haven't given a talk before, practice it at least 3 times. If you've given the talk many times before, practice it 1 time. You've got to practice it. For those people who haven't given a talk before, I used to say, talk in front of a mirror. These days you have mobile phones, you can record it, right? It's not everybody can do that. Yeah, okay. And so the first time you watch a video of yourself giving a talk, it's the most embarrassing thing ever. It's like, I can't believe it. It's just so absolutely terrible. This is what it looked like. This is what it sounded like. I can't believe it. It just feels completely wrong because we hear our voice through our bones, through a mastoid bone in the back of our ear. What you're recording is not that. So our internal recording of our voice is actually different from what everybody else hears. So it just sounds different. And then what sounds like a small mannerism becomes very magnified when you record it. So the first research talk I gave, my supervisor comes to me and he says, did you know that you're cracking your knuckles like this the whole time? I was so nervous, I was going like this over and over again. He said, we didn't really pay attention to what you're saying at all. You're watching your knuckles and you're cracking it again. I didn't even know it. Okay. So if you're doing it, then you'll see it on the recording, and hopefully you won't do it arrive early, right? Test your laptop, make sure it works. So I arrived early for this talk, and so should you for a talk. Bring a memory stick if you really, if the connection wouldn't work, and then do the talk in a blackboard or whiteboard if necessary. Remember enough about the talk. That shouldn't happen, but I had to do it once. Bring a pointer, laser pointer, or stick, or a pen. It's useful, or just grab on a marker. Little humor goes a long way. What did I say over here? Yeah, I think you should be more explicit here in step 2. Then a miracle occurs. So a little fun is good. End on time. Again, this is really quite important. If you have a seminar that's supposed to go on till 3, and your talk goes on to 10 past 3 or 5 past 3, you're not respecting your audience, right? They have other things to do. It's not fair to keep them on, or they'll just leave. You have an inconclusive talk. So keep track of the time and make sure that you end on time, which I will. So this is the summary. This is the summary slide, right? So you put out all the things, the 13 rules for preparation, 11 rules for presentations, and they're not really very complex rules. There's many other more sophisticated things that you can do in terms of talks, which I haven't gone through, but this is like, basic stuff. There's more. Ryan, all of this is on my website. You can, this talk is there, and the video of this talk will also be there, but this talk is also on my website. I'll tell you more about that in a moment. Any questions about this, about talks at all? Okay, makes sense. So, yeah.
I have one. What's your opinion about the effects that you put on slides, like, get something appearing?
Animations.
Yeah, animations, yes.
Yeah. My I have struggled for 20 years to learn how to do effects in PowerPoint. I can't get it to work. And I discovered that it takes way too much time, just the ridiculous amounts of time. So if I want to have an effect, what I do is these days, I do this. I have a, this is the easiest. Where to put it? I have a, I should say, I had an Apple pen until this morning, which I seem to have misplaced, because it's just raw on the screen. That seems to be probably the easiest way for this to. I think I left it at home anyway. But animations and special effects and so on, they look great, but they're not big. And Prezi, those of you who use Prezi, Prezi makes half the audience nauseous. You go zoom in and zoom out, and zoom in and zoom out. Okay, when are we getting off this ship? That's like crazy. So if you have lots of time and no research waiting for you, go ahead and spend it on animations. But no, I don't. I like builds. You kind of build a little bit at a time, but that's about the most I'm going to do.
Yeah, because sometimes I have trouble with presenting a flow chart.
Yeah.
Because if you put the flow chart in a full slide, then people get looking to
Yeah,
other
so you
boxes.
do a build, right? So just present the first part and put rectangles on top of the other, hiding it. Then you make what you hide smaller and smaller, and then you build it out that way. You can do that. Yeah. So that works pretty well. I used a lot of these background color rectangles to hide stuff. It's a cheap animation. Yeah. Anyway. Okay, so I'm going to give you some miscellaneous advice, and then I'm going to skip to the how to read a paper. I should add that there was supposed to have been a segment by Saurabh Sethi on how to write a paper, and he has got a cold and he's sick enough that he can't even do it online. So he promises he'll do it later, but he won't. All right, so miscellaneous advice. Weekly reports. So I like all my students to write weekly reports, whether they like it or not. So Maddie's looking at me. And the reason is because, what is the format? What's in it? So I have a section called warm up. It says, what are you working on? It just repeats each week what I did, what insights, references, and meeting agenda. And it's about a page, sometimes 2 pages, sometimes a bit longer, depending on what you did. Why? Right? The first thing is it keeps track of what you did. Right? It keeps track. So maybe 5 years from now, you say, what was I doing in October 2022? I'm sure I felt very busy, and I wonder what I was doing. No problem. Go to your report and see what you did, at least what you did in terms of research. If you have work piling up week after week reports, once you have enough, then you can just make a paper out of it, assuming you're making progress, right? So in my final year as a PhD student, I started doing this as myself. Actually, my supervisor didn't ask me to do it, but I started doing it for myself. And every 3 months, I had enough content for a paper. So I had 4 papers published in my final year, just from taking weekly reports and kind of stapling them together and getting a paper out of it. Which was kind of fun, but it worked, right? So it keeps track of what you did. It's content for papers, especially when you have the references. If you do this in LaTeX using Overleaf or something like that, then you already have all the paper references that you need. It makes meetings more efficient, because when I meet with somebody, I don't ask them what you to do. I say, okay, there's a problem here. Let's go talk about that, right? Or this is the next step you need to do. So it makes meetings way more efficient than spending a lot of your time answering what you do, right? We don't want to do that. And as I said, it creates a bibliography. Now, why is there a warm-up? This warm-up, what big project are you working on? It has 2 purposes. One is, this is meant for basically supervisors who have a lot of students and may not remember what you're working on. So that's a problem. And so you want to remind them what you're doing. And second, by reinforcing the big picture, it actually helps you to keep track of the forest, not just focusing on the trees. So you want to know what the big picture is, and that's what the warm-up reinforces over and over again. And then what I did, that's just a report of what you did. Insights makes you think about what you did. You want to not only do something, but you want to think about the process of what you did. Was it an efficient process? Was that a good process? Are there things you could have done better? Did you waste time on something? Those are all insights. And the more you think about the process of research, the better research you will be, right? You don't want to just do something. You want to think about doing it as you're doing it and afterwards reflecting back what you did. So there's an absolutely wonderful book called How to Solve It by Polya. who was a Nobel laureate in chemistry, and he talks about how to solve any problem. And part of that is a reflection step. You solve the problem, you look back and say, how did I solve it? What method did I use? How can I reuse that method later? And that's what this insights is about. And then the references in the agenda. So even if your supervisor doesn't want you to do a weekly report, if you do a weekly report and you give it to her or him, they will be very happy. They'll be super happy with you. If you mail it to them on the day of your meeting saying, I just did a report for you, and this is the meeting agenda, this is what you're going to discuss with the meeting, this is what I want to have. And it makes things much, much easier. So I also know that the first 2 or 3 times you do it, it feels really horrible. It's a lot of work, but it gets better. So Maddie, I think now I can put you on the spot and see what is your experience. Because you've been doing this for about, 7 months, 8 months?
Yeah, I actually really like the weekly reports. And something that was super helpful for me was in this process when I actually came around to writing my IRES report at the end. It was so easy for me to look back and see what I'd done. And there were so many times that I looked back and thought, what actually did I do? I don't really feel good about it. And then when I looked at my reports, I was like, oh my gosh, I actually tried all of these different things. I worked through all these different problems. So I'm a huge fan.
Thank you. That was not a planted question. Okay. The other thing was on writing papers. Sarah was going to talk about the thing, but I just had a few things I wanted to do. So I think it's good to publish papers, but publishing papers is really not the end goal. The end goal is to do good work. And when you've done the work, you want to report on it. That's what publishing is, right? All too often, especially last 10 years, I guess, people are focused on the publication rather than what is the content of the publication. Their figure of merit for the quality of the research is, I had 3 papers in conference X and 2 papers in journal Y. Yeah, but what was it about? It doesn't really seem to matter. I had a colleague I met some years ago, and they said, how are things going? He said, I had 3 papers accepted so-and-so conference. I said, I know, but what are you doing? You can't have that sort of the cart pull the horse, in some sense, or tail wag the dog, whatever you like. And also quality trumps quantity, in the sense that if you have, about 1 million papers are published every year, ballpark. Let's say, I don't know, 1 million, maybe 1.5 million papers are published every year. How many of them do you think are cited 5 years after they were written, right? Like 10,000 across all fields. And 10 years later, far fewer. So if you want to be writing a paper that's cited, 20 years after it's written, or 30 years or 100 years, whatever, you can't be writing 50 papers in a year. You have to write 1 or 2 really well done papers. So in this whole chase of publishing and so-called H-index, which if you haven't heard about it, you'll find out about it soon enough. This kind of thing, people are chasing a quantity and citation count rather than quality. So we get researchers who say, well, I've had publications in this, and this, rather than I solved this and this and this problem. Right? There's a difference between the two. So that's what I mean. The publish would not be any cost, and quality trumps quality. Avoid gratuitous math, especially in computer systems research, which is my background. People feel that, I need to put in some math just because it doesn't feel good otherwise. And so they put in these Greek symbols and they put the equations, and you look at it and say, you didn't need to. You could have said all of that in one very simple sentence. You don't need to put all this complicated terminology. So whenever I see a paper, as a reviewer, I see a paper with, Math Cal A for something, this very fancy script, A equals the set of computers in my data center. I'm like, okay, the work is so bad, they have to pad it up with math. So that's gratuitous math. Fuzzy writing indicates fuzzy thinking, and both are bad. So if you can't understand what a sentence means in a paper, in writing a paper, that means you can't explain it to somebody, then you aren't thinking it through. You have to be able to write sentences where each sentence is absolutely crystal clear what it's about. And if you can't do that, then basically you're doing something wrong. What's the 1 week rule? The 1 week rule is you should have the paper ready, all the research done 1 week before the deadline. And if it's not done 1 week before the deadline, you don't submit the paper. You can't do research in the last week or the last hour as I've seen some colleagues do. Okay, so it's a bit of discipline. So the last week is only to improve the presentation, and you can't. Hone your writing and your thoughts. Avoid fuzzy writing and fuzzy thinking. So hone, you just have to, you have to be thorough. You have to take every sentence and say, can I remove some words from it, right? You want to. There's this absolutely wonderful book called Elements of Style by Strunk and White. How many of you heard about Strunk and White? Okay, so if you now you heard about it, it's William Strunk and E.B. White, who are both. William Strunk was a professor at Cornell, and E.B. White was a writer for the New Yorker, and he was Strunk's student. And they wrote this, a 50-page book called Elements of Style, and they have rules. One of the rules, I think, rule number 17 is omit needless words, right? And they said a sentence should have no extra words, just like a machine should have no extra parts, right? You just need just enough to convey the meaning that you want to have, and no more and no less. So it's sort of radical simplicity of expression, but it's perfect for expressing scientific thoughts. And as for papers, you want to do that. So when you're writing, you will get rejections. Paper will get rejected. I get rejections all the time, and so will you. It strengthens your work because when a paper gets rejected, it tells you there are gaps in your thinking. You didn't explain things properly, or you didn't think about the assumptions properly, or whatever. Because we get tied up in our own thinking, our own ways of, what we think the problem should be, and and what the reviewer does is to expose you to a different point of view. So it should be. If you're attending talks, research talks, not talks like this, but take detailed notes and ask questions, right? Keeps you from sleeping. Okay. So if you ask a question that you think is, okay, most people don't ask questions, oh, that's a dumb question. There are no dumb questions, only dumb answers, right? So if you don't understand something, ask a question, right? You'll be surprised if you ask a question, everybody in the audience is probably thinking, I don't understand it, I'm really stupid, I'm not going to ask the question. But if you say, I know I'm stupid, I don't care, I'm going to ask anyway, then you ask the question. So I ask questions in all the talks that I go to, pretty much, and everybody thinks I'm stupid, but I don't care, I understood the problem. Also, it keeps you from sleeping. I used to sleep in lectures after lunch all the time as a graduate student. And I learned this the hard way because when I was interviewing for a job at my same university a few years later, the head of the interview committee was the guy in whose seminar I slept. And there were only 8 people in this room in a little table, and I was in the corner dozing away. Luckily, I was auditing and I didn't take it for credit, but I'm very sure I didn't get the job because that guy, he was sleeping in my class. If I'd been awake and asking questions, I'd have got the job. And I wouldn't be in Cambridge. Well, so, okay, a little bit about time management. Time is all you have. When you die, you will not get more time. You won't get more money either. But you probably, at that point, you probably want more time and not more money. So you probably, time is all you have. So you want to be careful about what you spend it on, how you do it. And one of my students taught this to me, called it a big list of small tasks. So it's a big list, actually it's a very long list of things I expected to do. And I know, as they say, when you die, your inbox will be full. When I die, my to-do list will also be full because I'm never going to get around to it. I have way more ambitions for what I want to do with my time than I have available time. So what you do is you break up big tasks into small tasks because it forces you from not procrastinating. So imagine you have a task, do PhD thesis, okay? You think you're going to work on that? No, you'll say, I think I need a cup of coffee. You have the coffee, you say, I think I'll read the newspaper. There must be something on Facebook because the thing, do PhD thesis is sitting on your task list. It's never going to get done, right? Your MRes thesis, whatever, never going to get done. But you say, prepare outline for chapter 1, subsection 1. You can do that, right? So take a big task and break it up into smaller tasks where no task takes more than 20 minutes. And like I use this thing called Todoist.com. It's a free thing. You can get it. You can put it on your laptop. You can put it on your phone. You can put it on your desktop. It syncs up. It's quite nice. But there are many such tools, and that's just a tool I use. And then what I do is every morning I reprioritize all my tasks. I say, okay, these are my high priority tasks, these are my low priority tasks. And so the low priority tasks are slowly sink down. And once a year I go and delete like 1,000 tasks I never did. And it feels great. It's like all of these 1,000 tasks, I don't have to do them. They're all out of date. Now contact X about Y. It's 1 year ago. It doesn't matter. It's over. So you purge all those old tasks once a year or something like that. But then this is very important. Do the highest priority task no matter how much you don't like doing it. Even if you hate doing it, just do it. Right? And you're shaking your head.
That's rough.
Yeah, I know. It's willpower, it's discipline. But that's how you get things done, because otherwise the task that you don't want to do is going to kind of sit there kind of oscillating. Even if it's at the top and the most highest priority thing you have to do, it'll sit there, you won't do it, and then you miss deadlines, you do stuff like that. Whatever. It's a big problem. So this big list of small tasks, those tasks are small, you reprioritize them, and you always do what's at the head of the list, no matter how you hate doing it. You will never miss a deadline. So I've been doing this for more than 20 years. I've never missed a deadline. Not one single deadline, ever. And if I promise somebody I'll do it, I have an organizer, I have a pen, and I have actually these are visiting cards which are out of date. People I don't know anymore, they may be dead by now. And I use that to write little notes over here. And so I have a list of things to do over here. So it's always with me. And then I upload them, I copy them into todoist.com. If I say something, if I promise you, okay, I'll do it. If I write it down over here, it'll get done. Not maybe today, but it will get done. Eventually. Unless I delete it a year from today, yes.
You might have more than one task in some subject, but personally, how much time do you spend doing the same thing,
The same thing?
Yes,
like what?
Working on your PhD research. So
so what you do is you break it up into small tasks. When you say working on PhD thesis, that's non-specific.
Yes,
right?
but like you change because you have more than one thing to do.
Yes,
so you keep changing the things you're doing the same day, or you just keep working on the same subject for a long time.
No, so each task is 20 minutes, right? Less than 20 minutes. So what you want to do is to break it up into subtasks and then reprioritize. So there are two things that we have to distinguish between urgent and important, right? So some tasks are urgent, they need to be done before a deadline, and some tasks are important. So the urgent and important you have to do right away. If it's urgent and not important, maybe you shouldn't be doing that, right? Like getting a cup of coffee is urgent and not important. And there's important, important and not urgent, right? Those are like working, getting a PhD, and that you want to reprioritize from time to time. And not important and not urgent is what most people end up doing. Checking your Facebook status is not important, it's not urgent. So most people will procrastinate by doing not important, not urgent work. Like, anyway, you have, each of us has their own way of doing not important, not urgent work, but that's what you should be doing on weekends. Okay, any questions about this sort of fairly random stuff about time management and weekly reports that I thought it was worthwhile just mentioning this? Any questions? Okay, bottom line. Have fun doing research. Researchers are not going to become like Elon Musk. He's not a researcher. Okay. I'm going to switch now to the show on how to read a paper, which is here. Yeah, there we go. Okay, so before I go on to any questions about anything I've said so far? Yes.
I have a question about how to write the paper.
Yes.
So is it a process that you usually do continuously while you're working on your research, even if you don't really know yet where you're going? Or is it something that you should entirely schedule for the end and you should start X amount of weeks before the paper deadline and then write all at once? Yeah,
weekly reports, so basically that's what it is. So the weekly reports essentially are the bits that will go into a paper eventually. So what do we have? If you have weekly reports every week, then you have what you need for writing a paper. But I didn't talk about how to write a paper mainly because that's what Saurabh is going to talk about when he gets back. Any other questions? Yes.
It's quite easy to split up your time with a meeting here and then half an hour and then
Yeah.
meeting there. Do you generally put all your meetings, try and get them in one day or something?
Yeah, I try to, well, in the life I lead, I can't fit all my meetings in one day. That would be impossible. I need 50 odd days. No, I try to put all the meetings in the afternoon. And then what I do is I create a meeting for myself called prep time every morning from 9 to 10. So 9 to 10 is actually, I don't have a meeting most days, but that's my time where I get the stuff done. So yeah, so now you know. That busy period 9 to 10 is my meeting. It's my meeting with myself. So it always shows up as busy, but you can just create, but if you have meetings, try to put them all in on one day. Yeah. In terms of time, the other thing I should say is, personally, I think that nobody needs to work more than 40 hours a week. 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. You take 1 hour off for lunch, so 9 hours a day, 5 days a week. You don't need to work from home. You don't need to work on weekends. I actually have not worked on weekends, with a few exceptions, since 1988. I just don't. And if you go to a website, it says I don't respond to email on weekends. It's true. I only respond to my family on weekends. But I don't do that. And I don't, I basically, I have to be careful. Other than Lent term, when I have two classes and I simply can't get everything done, then I work from home. But before I came to Cambridge, I never worked from home. I never worked on weekends. You should try and do the same. 40 hours is more than enough, but you'd be surprised. Most students, most people doing research, most PhD students, I should say, where they spend 50, 60 hours, maybe 70 hours a week in the department, of which maybe 20 hours are productive. 40 productive hours is a tremendous amount of time. It's huge, huge amount of time. You can get a lot done in 40 hours a week. So it's a matter of managing your time properly. And so I don't really I don't ask anybody to work more than 40 hours a week. But I'd be surprised if people got even to 20, actually, in terms of actual working time, rather than being distracted with other things. Okay. I have about half an hour left, so I'm going to talk about how to read a paper. So I want to give a little bit of a story just to explain where this comes from. I used to be a professor at Cornell University in the US until 99. And then in 99, my students, we started a company. We actually came with something that eventually became Docker, but we did it before the crash, so we got wiped out in the crash. But we had the idea of how to do this kind of stuff, like what Docker does. So back in '98, we moved to Silicon Valley, raised a lot of money, and anyway, 2003, I went back to being a professor, and to my shock, I had forgotten how to read a paper. So I used to know how to read a paper. I was pretty decent at it, but I'd forgotten. And so I was reading a paper. It didn't make any sense. Mindset changes when you're out in industry. You will discover this. When you're in industry, you have a very different way of dealing with research and dealing with the colleagues, etc. And so it was a very hard transition for me to come back into academia. And in 2005, I kind of got back into reading papers, and I was talking to a friend of mine, and he said, "Oh, I think I finally know how to read a paper, and I've taught myself how to do this, how I do it." And he said, "Oh, why don't you write it up, and I'll publish it in this magazine that he was the chief editor of." And I said, "Fine." I wrote it up. It's 2 pages, and it got published in 2007. And to my surprise, it's the paper that my most read paper. Mostly because it's only 2 sides. It has no math in it, and it's kind of easy to read. But a lot of people seem to read it. Has any of you read this paper already? I think. Oh my God! Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of you read it already. Okay, great.
I read it, but I didn't know it was 5 years until now.
There you go.
And now I just remembered.
Yeah, fantastic. So it's got, some people have translated it into, various people have translated it to various languages, and I get about, I don't know, a few messages a month, not a lot, maybe 5 messages a month, every month, from people who are using it. But anyway, so I figured I should at least tell you about it because so many people haven't seen it. Okay, so when you get a bill like this, an energy bill, you don't really start at the top left corner, say Duke Energy, Statement Electric Service, 99999. You don't do that, right? That's kind of stupid, right? What do? You say, oh, my total is so many kilowatt hours, and my payment is $142 and it's due on February 16th, right? That's what you read, right? What else do you care about? You don't need to read this number down there. You don't need to write, maybe you want to scan your usage, right? Why? Why do you do that?
Because that's what's important to you.
Exactly. You don't need to know all the other stuff, right? Yet when you see a paper, what do? You start at the beginning. Oh, low power mode. Okay. Cool. Okay, better talk fast. Shut down on me. So what happens is that you start reading from the first thing. You shouldn't do that because a paper has structure too. You have a title, you have an abstract, you have figures, you have conclusion, you have references, right? So what you want to do essentially is just like a bill, you want to read the important stuff first. So that's basically the idea. Don't read linearly. Instead, make 3 passes. So the first pass, you get a general idea what the paper is about. My bill is $142. It's due on so-and-so date. The second pass, you understand, roughly speaking, what your usage was, things like that. And then the last pass, you have in-depth understanding. So let me go over that. So first pass, you're getting a bird's eye view. It should take about 5 to 10 minutes. And you just read the title, abstract, introduction. You read the section and subsection headings, the conclusions, and you glance over the references. And you just kind of, what is this paper about? You're just kind of riffing through it, seeing what's there. And if you are in the field for a long time and you've seen this kind of stuff before, what will happen is that you already have a pretty good idea by this time what the paper is all about. After the first pass, you should answer these questions. What kind of paper is it? Is it a research paper? Is it a white paper from industry? Is it is it experimental paper? What is it, right? What is the context? What other papers have you read that refer to it? Is the paper from some machine learning conference, for example? What are the papers related to? Does it make sense? Do the assumptions seem valid? Are they making bizarre assumptions? What are the contributions in your opinion, and how clearly is it written? You can just make out right away, is it well written, or are they using all sorts of complicated terminology? It's just a gut feeling for these 5 things that you want to get to. In the second pass, you want to read more carefully, but feel free to ignore details. If there are proofs or theorems, ignore the proofs, just read the statement. Spend about an hour going through it and focus on the figures and diagrams and illustrations. Because you want to look to see, are these figures well made? Are they, are they properly labeled? Do they make sense? Are there error bars, if any statistical thing? If they aren't, then probably the paper is not very good because they haven't been thorough preparing the figures properly. And then if you see the references, oh gosh, really, this is going away. So in the third pass, you want to mark this, and you should be able to summarize the content. And then the third pass, you want to actually figure out what the paper was completely from the inside out. So what you want to do is to say, if I had the same assumptions as the authors, what would I have done? And you compare what you had done with what the authors did, and you should be able to reconstruct the entire structure of paper from memory and find strong and weak points. So that's what you want to do in the third pass. So I'm going to just go through the slides and then answer questions before the power runs out on this one. So how do you use this for literature survey? First, you want to choose some keywords and some recent papers to do a first pass on each of them, and that allows you to find related work sections and find and see they're citing any survey. If they've already cited a survey, that's great, you're done, you found your survey, right? If they haven't cited it, then what you want to do is you want to find, are these papers all citing the same papers? If they're citing the same papers with repeated author names and shared citations, these are good papers in this area. So these are what I call key papers. And go download the key papers, set them aside, and then find out who wrote these papers. Who are the big cheeses in the space? Go to their website and find out what they published recently. Where did they publish recently? If you find they all cite, Professor X from Stanford, and go to Professor X website, they say, oh, I published, 2022, I published in this journal. Say, okay, let's go to the journal, see what they did. Let's see what this paper is. We're trying to accumulate a body of good papers and top authors, right? And you're kind of going back and forth. So then you go to the websites of these top conferences and journals, and you see what did they publish? What is recent high quality related work? And you basically make a second pass of these top papers and the third pass on the best, most promising papers. Once you've done that, You just iterate. So now you got your 5 papers to start with. Find what the intersection is. What do they share in common? These are the key papers. Find who published them. Those are the key authors. And then from the key papers and key authors, you can expand where did they publish, which conferences and journals are the best ones, what did they publish recently. You kind of go in this way round and round. And basically, you're done. Okay, I'm going to stop this for now and until this dies. Okay, so yeah, I will. This is what I wanted to say, and we will probably end early. So let me stop with that and answer any questions. Yes, okay.
So what does virtually re-implement the paper actually look like?
What does it look like? So, if you remember, when you write a paper, you're going to make some assumptions, and you're trying to solve a particular problem, right? So you say, if I were given that problem to solve, and I were given those assumptions, what would I do, right? If you're a beginner in the field, you probably have no idea. Anyway, you're reading the paper so that you can understand what it's about. But if you are a bit experienced, you've seen, you say, oh, that paper solved it using this way, and this author solved it using this way. Why did they use this approach? What would I do? So the more experience you have, the more you can contrast your best shot with what the authors did, and that allows you to contrast the two. And in some cases, you say, I have no idea. Okay, fine, I'll see what the authors did. But if you have an idea, then you're able to kind of compare what you would have done, ideally, if you had the same, resource and so on. But it doesn't always work. I mean, in some cases, it works because you have enough background. But if you don't have enough background, then you can't do it. Does it answer your question?
Yeah. So is it more of a thought experiment, or are you then actually?
No, it's a thought experiment. It's a thought experiment. Yeah, 10 hours is not enough to actually do anything. Yeah. Any other? Yes.
So I followed your method of reading paper before.
Yes.
I have two questions. First one is, well, the first part I'm not able to fast browse all the references.
Yeah.
I found I stuck there. Like I managed to finish that in 10 minutes. It's easy for me to look into every headline of each section in the main paper.
Yeah,
but
yeah.
when I go to the reference, I found it to take me a long time to just read the titles.
Okay.
Headlines of each reference.
Yeah, so when you start out working in a field, it will take you longer because you haven't seen these papers before. Once you've been working in a field 3, 4, 5 years, you say, oh yeah, I've seen that. Okay, that's a new one.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe related to this answer, my second question about, I think in the second part, it's also difficult for me to understand the method without looking into the mathematical details or some equations. So it's very easy for me to slide into the third pass.
Yeah.
Just try to
It's
start
true.
the second pass.
Even when you're doing the first pass, you'll be tempted to read all this, read more. And even it happens to me. So I'm reading a paper and I say, wait a minute, I'm reading this from beginning to end. I'm supposed to know better than that. So it's very easy for us to fall into the linear structure. So you have to force yourself to not do that. Yeah. It's again discipline. It's the same thing. Yeah. Yes.
Is there some tool that can visualize a graph of these papers, who is referencing who, so that you can see the notes that are pretty key in certain areas because they have so many citations?
Yeah, so I mean, Google Scholar, if you type in a keyword, it will put the most cited papers on top. So you can do that. That's sometimes helpful. There's something called Microsoft Semantic Web what is it called? Academic Scholar. Mm-hmm. That was done 3 or 4 years ago by some researchers from China. It looked okay. I don't know if they've been keeping updated or not, but that did seem to have, who are the key authors in each.
Yeah, because even the references are often sorted alphabetically at the end of the paper, and then it's just kind of hard to figure out which one is then.
Yes, so Google Scholar is helpful because Google Scholar is a good way. You can put in some keywords, and then it will tell you the most cited papers, most cited papers in the last 5 years, etc. And I find that that's quite helpful. Yes?
Something called Connected Papers.
Connected Papers.
Website that does exactly that.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I hadn't seen that.
Would you ever recommend actually re-implementing someone's paper?
You do need to do that if you're writing a paper yourself, which is, when you want to compare your work with prior work. Remember that ogre-proof fence. You say, I built ogre-proof fence and ogre infestations went down 50%, but the other guy's fence, it only went down 20%, right? So you have to have that why is your work novel given prior work? So yeah. Sorry, was there another question? Yeah.
So like you said, obviously you don't want to be just replicating something that someone's done before.
Yeah.
But with a field like machine learning where there's so many papers, it's hard to really know if someone's done it before because the most cited papers might not be the ones that are similar. So how do you find out if there's like an obscure paper that might be really similar to what you're
just
finding?
put in more keywords basically, and if you have a particular technique, say self-supervised learning for X, and try and find it is a matter of a little bit of luck. And that's one reason why going to conferences in person makes a big difference, because when you meet people, you can say, I'm working in this field. Oh, yeah, you should talk to so-and-so. They already did it 2 weeks ago or something like that. So that helps. Yes.
Yeah, and to go with Ankar, sometimes if you have like this type of research and you don't know what keyword to use, you do your first research, wait 2 days, do the same research, but you're going to change your keyword because you're going to formulate different. You might find a good result.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just trying to see if I can find the Zoom if anybody else is on it. Oh, there's nobody else there. Okay. That will save my battery. Okay. Any other questions? Other questions? Okay, good. So we are 15 minutes ahead of time. So good. You have 15 minutes extra in your life. It's the end of the time. Thank you very much. I hope this was useful. If you have any comments, just send me a mail. I'm happy to take a look and respond. Okay, great. We'll see you around.
Yes. Kevin, like, do you prefer guys? And every other one. What's your
No, I haven't.
Oh yeah, thank you.
I've seen a few talks on this subject. Yeah, I like it.
But that takes time using animation to do. Let's say you have bullet points, you appear one after the other.
Yeah.
And you can even do what I do on PowerPoint is transparency, so only the one you're talking about is like right and all.
Yeah, grayed out. I know.
That's
I see that a lot on Beamer.
Yeah,
it's like Beamer. I see people do that, and I really like that because you sometimes want to be able to look ahead at the next bullet points.
Yeah.
But you don't want them to be under focus. I do.
PowerPoint is worse. You just add animation, but eventually when you're older, everything just takes forever.
Yeah, my favorite thing to do is with equations. I like to do overlay a transparent, semi-transparent colored box, and then use that like one slide at a time. Like rather than doing animations, a lot of times I'll duplicate a slide and then change one thing and do a factor animation with that. And so one thing I'll do if I have an equation is do that thing, overlay a semi-transparent box like with a certain color and be like this box versus this, like highlight a term, and then I'll do like, oh, and then this term does this, and then this term does this.
Sometimes I have a typo, I might do or I put like many shapes, rectangle, then I color them. First I put them in another color in the background so I can keep track of them.
Yeah.
And after that I state everything, take the color, put background, lock.
I'm not a huge fan of like animations in general.
PowerPoint
I was always under the impression that
PowerPoint is pretty good for animation, like reordering them, you can group them,
There's
and then you
certain
lock
things
them
where it's
together.
appropriate, but
simple ones are okay. Nothing too fancy like spinning around or rotating.
Last year, I think that's for one module I had environmental risk, do one slide to present something, and I did present on solar flare, potential environmental risk. And it was just random. I'm like, oh, yes, I knew it. I can explain it all. But you have one slide. Because that was the kind of the thing. One slide, 30 seconds. No, well, yeah, just with one slide. Massive amount of animations grouping together.
it's like a little bit crazy.
Even if
but-
small
So got
could
this
get sacked
there's a
5 second video animation goes like that is
soccer
cool.
game.
I don't have to do the animation.
It's not that
I
necessary.
I suspect there may be some useful, like, you can order any lectures, right?
Went to Borough
Yeah,
Market
I reckon there's some
Saturday.
useful things in like management or
business.
for sure.
I'm planning to do this
Yeah.
stuff. Maybe not for this specifically, but
As
yeah.
a chemistry, we can go to any lecture.
It's
Yeah,
nice to be able to just.
I was gonna ask how you're meeting with
You might ask why you're there, but it's like 4 people.
Well, I mean, I see him every day,
Yeah.
so.
You can just say you're interested.
Yeah.
Yeah, generally can't really do much about it.
For you.
As per usual.
Yeah.
How was Pub Night out there now? So I could go. It was good.
We learned.
What's your philosophy on? So my strategy for
That we can.
presentations.
Oh yeah, were you
like
getting an
maths
instant shot at yeah.
No.
to not
No?
do any
You
maths.
try to get it to the G?
I intentionally
Yeah.
will not have ever any equations.
That's a classic.
Really important.
Yeah.
Let's
I say that
I'm
as someone
doing
who
it
went to this game like 2 weeks ago, so.
No, that's.
Yeah.
I might get
Yeah.
people in
I mean, the key
somewhere.
really is when
That's
you're teaching
fair.
people.
If I'm doing
Yeah.
something at
Otherwise
it's
it's
fine, it's a
Those
long
are embarrassing
Yeah,
things.
yeah.
I do this all the time.
going
It's too
around.
complicated.
I'm not going to do the whole navy stuff. I'm going to put
It's happening again this
here
Thursday.
rotational
Okay.
is bigger.
Yeah, I'll be there this
Here
Thursday.
dimension might
Yeah,
be
yeah,
important,
I'll
so
have
the equation simplifying those
That's a
quick
college
bits
thing, I
and we introduce that.
Yeah, was there any calculations or like?
Yeah,
or-
not the big
They're just
thing.
like the final
Yeah.
results, kind of that.
You're fine.
I can even do that.
You
That you
might
can
say
confirm
you
meetings
might
from?
say I'm
Yeah.
using navy stocks, but I'm still using like
This is
rotational
That was
bigger.
This was
the
rotational
funniest
rotation and all
lectures
that.
I've
So
ever been.
this is
like not in like
this is the
a
final
comic
result.
way, just
Very
like it was so true.
Yeah, but
It was so
It's
honest.
like kind of.
Yeah, it was-
and funny.
Yeah.
Like,
I guess that's true.
I know what you mean, like it was
Something
funny,
else.
but not like
If
a
you're
trying to
doing,
be
like-
funny way.
Yeah, yeah,
It was
it's
just like
Most of what you'll do is point
Classification things.
Most of
Yeah.
what I do is point.
Absolutely.
Some
basic machine learning.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah,
with those things like usually
particularly
the
on-
math's kind of forgotten.
Yeah,
Like, you don't really need
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Doesn't really
Well,
affect
yes,
your
I'm
results.
doing
Funny
paper,
bits.
it's like-
In the paper, yeah.
Everything.
oh shit. Okay.
Yeah, until I catch on a shirt.
Maybe
Five
like
seconds.
the slide with the
Supervising.
derivation on it, so if someone asks, I can have a hard time
Uh,
looking at it.
I think my concern is that
Yeah.
reviewers, when
A
reading stuff,
seminar tomorrow.
will expect there to be
What is it? Is it
mathematical
Tuesdays?
basis to everything.
Well, I think the abstract generally, not the abstract, sorry, the appendix is a good way to do that. Yeah, so that's what it was in my undergrad thesis. Like, I barely had any math in the main body, and then I just had like 20 pages of math in the appendix. So yeah, it works out. And people generally aren't going to read it, but if someone's like very curious or very into it,
Right.
they can always go there
And
and
then I
have a
just
look.
like socialize.
Yeah, yeah,
And I
yeah.
was like,
That makes
damn it,
sense.
like I've gotten nothing done.
That's how I feel with
Figure it out. Don't have to worry about it.
It's fine,
Yeah,
but I
cool.
just
Are you
get
guys
so
walking
bored
back?
of cycling around
Yes.
and like
Alright.
going places and like taking notes, and then I'm like, I have 100 other
How about you?
notes that I
I'm
need
going
to
to
answer.
Volleyball Tribe today.
Volleyball.
Yeah. Okay, I don't think we have a seminar tomorrow.
The cycling time really got to me where I'd be like, well, there goes an hour.
I started doing wallpaper mode, which is like,
Especially when it's cold and dark.
it wasn't more than 2 hours of advice.
No way.
That's smart.
But that's pretty social. Then people stop going pretty soon. When it gets
Yeah.
cold and cold and wet.
Yeah, when it becomes absolutely miserable.
For 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 5 minutes later.
What's that?
5 minutes.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Thank you.